Chapter 2, A Little World of Mud. I had never thought there was much to be found in the rainwater pond behind our house, except for quantities of mud and the occasional water buffalo. It was grandfather who introduced me to the pond's diversity of life, so beautifully arranged that each individual gained some benefit from the well-being of the mass. To the inhabitants of the pond was a world, and to the inhabitants of the world, commented grandfather, the world was but a muddy pond. When grandfather first showed me the pond world, he chose a dry place in the shade of an old peepal tree, where we sat for an hour, gazing steadily at the thin grains scum on the water. The buffaloes had not arrived for their afternoon dip, and the surface of the pond was undisturbed. For the first 10 minutes, we saw nothing. Then a small black blob appeared in the middle of the pond. Gradually, it rose higher, until at last we could make out a frog's head, its big eyes staring hard at us. He did not know if we were friend or enemy, and kept his body out of sight. A heron, his mortal enemy, might have been wading about in search of him. When he had made sure that we were not herons, he passed this information on to his friends and neighbors, and very soon there were a number of big heads and eyes on the surface of the water. Throats swelled, and there began a chorus which went, "Work, work, work." In the shallow water near the tree, we could see a dark, shifting shadow. When we touched it with the end of a stick, the dark mass immediately became alive. Thousands of little black tadpoles wriggled into life, pushing and hustling one another. "What do tadpoles eat?" I asked grandfather.
"They eat one another much of the time,"
said grandfather, who had once kept a few in an aquarium.
"It may seem an unpleasant custom, but when you think of the thousands of tadpoles that are hatched, you will realize what a useful system it is. If all the young tadpoles in this pond became frogs, they would take up every inch of ground between us and the house."
"Their croaking would certainly drive grandmother crazy," I said, to which grandfather agreed. When grandfather was younger, he had once brought home a number of green tree frogs. He put them in a glass jar and left them on a window sill without telling anyone at all, of their presence. At about 4 in the morning, the entire household was awakened by a loud and fearful noise, and grandmother and several nervous relatives gathered on the veranda for safety. Their fear turned to anger when they discovered the source of the noise. At the first glimmer of dawn, the frogs had with one accord burst into song. Grandmother wanted to throw the frogs, bottle and all, out of the window. But grandfather gave the bottle a good shaking, and the frogs stayed quiet. Everyone went to sleep again, but grandfather was obliged to stay awake in order to shake the bottle whenever the frogs showed signs of bursting into song again. Fortunately for all concerned, the next day Aunt Mabel took the top off the bottle to see what was inside. The sight of a dozen green tree frogs so frightened her that she ran off without replacing the cover, and the frogs jumped out and got loose in the garden and were never seen again. By Ruskin Bond. Occasional, not happening regularly. Diversity, when many different types of people or things are included in something. Mass, a large number or amount of something. Here, everything that exists in nature. Inhabitants, animals or people who live in a place. Scum, a green layer that forms on the surface of ponds. Blob, a large round drop of something thick or sticky. Mortal, dangerous, causing death. Wading, walking through water. Hustling, making something move quickly by pushing or pulling. Custom, something that is usually done, habit. Croaking, deep rough sound made by frogs or crows. Glimmer, to shine with a weak or faint light. With one accord, to do something together and in complete agreement. Obliged, here, to be forced to do something.